Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to remind you, each and every podcast expands our base, which, of course, is our goal. I've been away for 3 weeks. And in those 3 weeks spent in Europe, I have had a real break. Not really a break, but rather a chance to reflect thoroughly and completely on where we are today. This morning, I flipped on the news and heard that not only are National Guard troops patrolling Washington, D.C. on the first day of school with sidearms and long guns in some cases, but that there is a real question now about whether or not Donald Trump will extend the National Guard coverage, not just to a city like Washington, D.C., or a city like Los Angeles, but now he's talking about Chicago and perhaps even New York. It is a peculiar thing for me, and I want you all to understand this. I was in Washington when the National Guard was on the streets of Washington in 1968 after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. There was no objection because there was an understanding that there was a need. And indeed, after January 6th, there was a need for the National Guard to be in Washington, D.C., but that call never came. Instead, Donald Trump and his administration have decided now to use the National Guard to patrol the streets of America. Theoretically, they believe, it will reduce the amount of crime. Wait, don't mention the fact that crime was down in Washington, D.C. Don't mention the fact that there is a legitimate question about whether or not federal forces, the National Guard, should be involved in policing our streets. After all, they are not trained in police efforts. But there is something more profoundly concerning to me, and that is the inability to prevent actions by the national administration because there is simply not the will, either in the House or Senate or in the Supreme Court, to temper what Donald Trump is doing. It is a curious thing, having been to Europe, people are befuddled. How is it possible that the United States of America, this great, free beacon of freedom, now has troops, federalized National Guard, on the streets of the nation's capital? It is incomprehensible. Where has the spirit of American democracy gone? And that's not the only thing that happened. Donald Trump is now suggesting that mail-in ballots should be forbidden. It's a curious thing because mail-in ballots, in large measure, were responsible for his election in 2024. But don't confuse the Trump administration with the facts. A lot of this is public relations. Let me say a word about the crackdown on immigration, because we are now seeing the threat of deportation of one individual who was deported to the wrong country, returned to the United States, and they're now talking about deporting him to yet another country with which he has absolutely no connection. The question becomes, who are we? What are we allowing? The general consensus in all the places that I visited in Europe was incredulity about where the United States is today. And let me quickly point out that while I was traveling, the conference on Ukraine took place in Washington, and there were high expectations with all of our European allies gathered round that Ukraine would be upheld, supported. And yet, when all of those events were taking place, the Russians were shelling Ukraine even more, with more effective weaponry. And the illusion which Donald Trump has created of a possible ceasefire, or even peace seems not to be real. In Europe, I read a book which is one of the most remarkable books I've ever read. It's called Appeasement of Hitler. I commend it to you. I don't think it received the circulation here in the United States that it should have, but it was a bestseller in Great Britain. This book describes the acquiescence of people in the face of real opposition and an attempt, illusory, of course, to prevent war by appeasement. My suggestion today is that what is happening too much in foreign affairs and in local affairs, national affairs, is the idea of appeasement. If we just hold on, it will all go away. But at what price? That's the question. These are serious times, and as the opposition to Donald Trump mounts, and as his threat to put National Guard on the streets of Chicago seems to be emphatic, talk even about putting National Guard troops in Oakland, California. All of this disturbs me. But more than that, it will require action by citizens who really care and who understand the threat to our democracy. This is not an easy podcast for me to deliver. It was my hope, my sincere belief, that perhaps 3 weeks into my departure, things would be better. Remember, one is dealing, when you deal with me, with an eternal optimist. But I come back from this trip, and now will be back routinely reporting to you every weekday that there is something wrong, and how we deal with that crisis of wrongness in our national life is going to be critical to all of us. These are disturbing times, and there are many, many issues to be discussed and analyzed. The last point I want to make is Donald Trump's war against the universities of America. Whether it is the University of California system, or Harvard, or, well, all of the major universities, there is a question that is being posed by university professors and people involved in education around the world. What in the world is America doing? I posed these questions this morning not because they are pleasant, but because they are necessary to debate and discuss. And now that we're back from our vacation, we're ready to roll up our sleeves and go to work. I will be with you every day. I will try to give you as much commentary as I can. And I urge you, think carefully about what I'm saying, because the future of democracy is at stake. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am John Rothman. Make sure to follow along and let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which is, of course, our goal. You can interact with me on LinkedIn. You can interact with me on Facebook. And, of course, you can email me directly. And a special thanks to Gogo Zoger. Gogo, I hope you had as nice a vacation as we did. Now it's back to work. I am John Rothman, and you are listening to Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you tomorrow.